Hi class, this is Dr. Overstreet, and I know in this week you're compiling all of the various milestones, looking at the feedback that you have received, and working on your magazine article, which is your final project. So I thought I'd take a moment to highlight some of the things to consider as you're putting this together and give you some tips on how to be successful in this final project. First of all, I want to make a comparison of the rubrics that have been used for your previous submissions. Those are the milestones do not count as much as the final project, but they're simply a tool to try to give you some feedback and make sure you're on the right track. If you notice, let me see if I can get to one of these. Let's see. This is one of the milestone rubrics. And if you'll notice, you have certain categories for scoring. The best that you can do in these rubrics for milestones is to be proficient. Proficiency, and we'll look, this is just an example from one of your milestones where you used sociological theory. So if you'll look, it says proficiency is that you've applied the conflict perspective to explain why the familial trend affects families differently. So that would be a proficient response. This next category was needs improvement, in which case you would get about half credit. And this says it applies the conflict perspective to explain why the familial trend affects families differently, but the response is cursory or illogical. And then finally you have the not evident category. The description is that it does not apply the conflict perspective to explain why the familial trend affects families differently. So this is in the past. The rubrics have either selected your response, or I've selected your response as proficient, you've done it, or you need to work on it, or it's not there. Now, the rubric for the final project adds a category. So what I want you to notice is now we have an exemplary category. So if you've scored proficiently on all of the previous milestones, let's say you got 100 on everything, that doesn't mean that you will necessarily get 100 on the final project, because in order to have an exemplary score, it takes it up a notch. So let's look. Proficiency now is only 85% versus 100% in the previous milestones. So if you want to do extremely well, I encourage you to focus your attention on the description for exemplary performance. So for example, this says you meet the proficient criteria and the explanation is especially clear and detailed. So just meeting the criteria is not enough, again, to get you full credit for that particular element. Here we see meets proficient criteria and context provides keen insight into the changing structure of the family, and so on. If we go down, we'll see, yes, you go over and above being proficient in each one of these categories. So I encourage you to look at what is required for exemplary performance and to certainly have that as your goal. Now, I want to highlight the basis really for formatting and the length of this article. Your magazine article should be 4 to 6 pages in length, and that's for the body of your paper. It should not be less than 4 or more than 6. And that is not including your cover page or your reference page. So you would have, the maximum would be a cover page, 6 pages of content and a reference page, or a minimum of your title page using APA format, 4 pages of content, and then your references pages. It should be double spaced. You should be using a 12-point Times New Roman font and 1-inch margins. You also need to include at least 3 scholarly references cited in APA format. So you have been required to provide more than 3 in your previous milestones, but at this point you're required to include 3 references. Keep in mind that academic honesty and integrity requires that you provide an in-text citation for any ideas or data that you've gathered from other sources. So if you're citing an article in the Pew Research Center, that needs to be, once you presented that content, you need to have that in parentheses next to that content with the date, and you can check your Purdue OWL guidelines for APA formatting for in-text citations, but that should be in the body of your paper. And then, of course, if you're using that content, you then provide the complete reference using APA format at the end of the paper. For me, I strongly encourage you to organize your paper in this way. You should begin with the introduction. Next, move to your discussion of the history behind the familial trend. Then make your comparative analysis with another country. You select the country, describe the norm, then you make the comparison. Then you address the next cell and so on, negative impacts, social institutions, etc., and so on. So you go down the list. I would encourage you to use some brief headings and certainly key words so that you can indicate where this content is located. And the reason I want you to have strong, explicit indications that you have provided each element of the paper. So you might begin a paragraph with these key terms, this is the familial trend and it's been going on for this long and so forth. In other words, I don't want to have to try to find these elements or to guess whether or not you are intentionally addressing each element. This should be explicit, apparent, easy to find, and the structure of your article should follow this rubric. Okay, then I'll scroll back through all of these. So I'm going to be scoring you, and you can see the weight of each one of these. I'm scoring each of these elements. If you're not clear about one of these elements, still contact me this week so that you can be sure to strengthen that particular section. Please incorporate the feedback that you've received so that you'll do well. And then, of course, you want to go above and beyond for exemplary performance. We go through all of those. This hits the last milestone here. And then the articulation of response. This is worth 4% of your score. This means that you have reviewed with someone else. If you have trouble with grammar or syntax, sentence structure, so that your thoughts don't really come across as clearly as they should, please give the Online Writing Center a message, a call, let them look at it and help review your submission for these items. You want to make sure that you've proofread. You want to make sure that your citations do follow APA formatting, that your references are complete. I think everybody is really on that in this class, but nevertheless, that's what will be scored with the articulation of response. And you can see how this flows. So I hope this is helpful. Again, this is your guide. There are no other requirements in terms of, how does it look, or do you have images or any of that type of thing. It's really what you're being asked to do is to write it in a way that someone could understand it. If they were to read it in a parenting magazine, it would be put in language that is directed towards such an audience. But at the same time, remember that this is really an artifact that shows that you have done a sociological analysis of a trend and that you do understand some of the concepts such as the theoretical perspectives, and you have done some research, found evidence of remedies that have been offered, and you want to offer a new remedy for any of the negative consequences of this trend. So I hope this helps you a little bit as you're working on this final wonderful project, and I'm really looking forward to reading these, and I want everyone to be exemplary in their performance. I know you can do it, and so please contact me if I can help you as you're working on this. Okay, take care, and best wishes to you.